Okay, so last time we finished the Wars of the Roses, and we ended up with the situation where uh, Henry Tudor had won the Battle of Bosworth Field, killing King Richard III, and then had married Richard III's niece, Elizabeth of York, and that united the House of York with the House of Lancaster. And then there had been a little bit of polishing off that needed to be done concerning some individuals who tried to rebel against Henry, but those all came to nothing. And then Henry VII had married his son Arthur to Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess. But then Arthur had died, and then his brother Henry had then married Catherine of Aragon, and then eventually old Henry VII died, leaving Henry to be King Henry VIII, and with his queen Catherine of Aragon. So this is the start of the period which is known as the Tudor period and the Tudor dynasty. Of course, old Henry VII was the first, but when people talk about the Tudors, they talk about Henry VIII and then his children. So now, as a young man, Henry VIII was really popular and famous for being quite interesting and cool guy. And he was very athletic, and he liked to do a lot of sports, especially jousting. That's riding horses and knocking people off of horses with a lance. And he liked music a lot, and he used to sing and write songs, a bit like Ed Sheeran or someone like that, but a bit better. Um, Now, there's a song called Green Sleeves, and some people say he wrote Green Sleeves, and some people say that he didn't, but he still wrote loads of really great songs, and they're really nice, actually. I like them anyway. So he's very talented. He was very talented and very, very good looking as well as a young man, although he turned into a fat fucking cunt. But uh, people said he was good looking, and he was sort of someone that other princes in Europe were jealous of. They thought he was dog's bollocks. um, Now, the king of France at this time was this guy called Francis, and Francis was the king of France, and Spain was ruled by this guy Charles V, Holy Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Empire was basically Germany, but a big expanded Germany, which included parts of Italy and parts of like the Czech lands and others as well, and Austria and bits of what's now France. So it was a huge empire in Central Europe, and it was called the Holy Roman Empire. And it was like a federal sort of system where there were lots and lots of different little states, but they were all united together in this sort of empire, a bit like the European Union, but with kings and stuff. Um, and Charles V was the king of Spain, and he was also the Holy Roman Emperor. So he was super, super powerful because he ruled as head of most of Europe. Also, his grandparents had sent um, had sent Columbus to discover America, and the Spanish had made lots of colonies in America, in the Americas and South America and the islands and stuff. And Spain had created an empire for itself, so they were really powerful as an empire, both in Europe and also in the American colonies. And also they were not to be fucked with. They were super strong. And there was something going on called the Spanish Inquisition, and this had been going on for a very long time. and basically the Spanish church and the Spanish monarchy was fucking over people who were not proper Catholics, or who they thought were not proper Catholics, and they were going around torturing people and saying that they weren't proper Catholics, and they were really picking on the Jewish people most of all. And if you were Jewish, then they used to fucking kill you and stuff. So they were really hardcore and serious about their religion. England was still a Catholic country as well. And also this Charles V, the Roman Emperor slash King of Spain, was the nephew of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's wife. So they have a sort of an alliance with the English, and they're friendly because they have the family connection. As for the King of France, well, the new King of France has a kind of rivalry with Charles V, and they kind of fight each other, and they're fighting over territories, especially in Italy, where there are territories that the King of France claims and that also King of Spain claims as well. And so there's all this fighting going on in Europe over territory and who's going to be King of Naples or who's going to be Duke of Milan and so on. And Henry VIII wants to kind of manipulate this by sort of siding with one against the other and then changing sides again and so on. But Henry VIII doesn't really get involved in a lot of wars himself. He does a bit, but not very much, and it's certainly nothing like the 100 Years' War. You know, this is just, he gets involved a little bit with what's going on in Europe, but in terms of the big powers, France and Spain are the big fucking powers in Europe, and Henry is not really he's not really involved that much. He just likes to piss them off now and again, and he certainly has no way of sort of rewinding the 100 Years' War or taking back any lands in France. You know, that's not going to fucking happen. Now, Henry VIII has a sister called Margaret, who is married to the King of Scotland, James IV. And he also has another sister who briefly is married to the King of France, but who dies quite young, and then the King of France marries someone else. So that's the situation at the beginning of the 16th century. And then something else happens that's very important. Well, it's extremely important, actually. And that is the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Now, there had been some opposition to the Catholic Church, and over the centuries there had been various movements where people had ideas about religion which were different from those of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church and the Catholic monarchs of Europe had, you know, fucked over people and burned them alive for having these different views and opinions. One such person was John Wycliffe, who had been around in the 14th century, and he and his people had said, well, why can't we fucking read the Bible in English, you know, and translate it rather than having to rely on priests? And they'd said things like, well, a lot of these priests are really rich and they have all this money and power, and a lot of them are shagging and stuff, and they're not really consistent with the fucking what Jesus was saying, you know, and what the fuck's going on with the Catholic Church, and a lot of the people in it are cunts, and a lot of the things that they're saying we have to do is bollocks, and we disagree with it, you know, and there are all kinds of different groups that disagreed with things that the church was teaching. But if they said anything you know, then they used to get fucking burned at the stake. And as heretic, a heretic is what the religious people call somebody who says something that they don't like. They're called heretics. Um, so John Wycliffe was a heretic, according to the Catholic Church. And another one was this guy called Jan Hus, who was a Czech guy who was saying that the Catholic Church should change, and we should change some of the things we do in religion. And he was burned at the stake in 1415, and then after that there had been this huge rebellion in the Czech lands with this guy called Žižka, and there'd been a big war with these people who supported Jan Hus, and they're called the Hussites, and they were quite formidable, and the church and the kings had a lot of trouble trying to fight them because they were pretty fucking tough. But that had been mostly in the 15th century. But people didn't stop sort of criticizing the church and stuff. And another important thing that had happened sort of in the 1460s was that some cunt had created a machine for printing. I think his name was Gutenberg, and it was the printing press. So previously, if you wanted to write something, you had to use a pen and ink and write it on paper with your hands. And if you wanted to copy a document, you had to just sort of look at the document and then copy it with your hand, write another one. But this kind had made a machine where you could have all the letters sort of dipped in ink, and then you could rearrange those letters into words and sentences, and you could print. And it meant that it was a lot easier to distribute books or documents for people to read. So these people who had interesting religious ideas, they were able to get their ideas out more easily than before, because instead of having to say them or go out and shout in the street, they could publish these documents and these books and these pamphlets, and people could read them. It also meant that people wanted to start translating the Bible into their own languages so that people could read them themselves. And part of the Catholic idea was that the Bible had to be in Latin, and you couldn't be fucking reading it in your own language, and you had to be told what your religion was all about by the church and by the authorities, and they you know you had to, they were the people that were in charge of the religion, not any cunt. It's not for any cunt to read the Bible himself and make his own mind up. It's for the church to tell people what the belief system is and how they should worship, and for people to follow the church, you know, with the Pope at the head, and then the bishops and priests and all the rest of them underneath. And it's not for some cunt to just make up his own interpretation of the religion. So these heretics were kind of doing that. These heretics were sort of wanting to make up their own mind and have their own interpretation of the religion, and criticize the church and the priests and everything. And this was seen as dangerous by the church, because they don't want to be questioned and they don't want people criticizing. They want people to shut the fuck up and do what they're told. And if anyone does fuck about, then it's a serious business. And they used to burn people alive for disagreeing with them. Now, in the sort of near the beginning of the 16th century, there was this cunt called Martin Luther, and he was a guy, and he used to go around preaching and telling everyone that the Catholic Church is shit, and that they should fucking have their own Bible and read it in English, and that the church is corrupt and the Pope's a cunt, and that they should have their own new version of Christianity where it's going to be better. And of course, they were against the church and the Catholic faith and against the Pope. And the Pope and all his people were trying to put them down. And there was this big argument, for people's minds and people's hearts in Europe about whether they thought they should stay Catholic or whether they should go with this new Protestant thing. Protestant meant not Catholic, but still Christian. So these people were called Protestants, and they didn't all have the same name. There were different sort of groups of Protestants with different names for what they were doing, and they had different views and different interpretations. But the main thing that's important is that they were Protestants, meaning that they were sort of going against the Catholic Church and going to create something new instead. So you've got Catholics and you've got Protestants, and the Catholics are the traditional ones who've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years and have always been in control of the religion. And then the Protestants are these new guys that have their own new system and want to do things differently and have different beliefs. So anyway, Martin Luther is quite successful in Germany, and some of these states in Germany change, and some of these princes change from being Catholic to being Protestant. And in some countries, the Protestants are being killed by the Catholics, and then there are some people fighting each other over these things, and it spreads all over Europe, and it creates a lot of fucking conflict and a lot of arguments between people. And you've got people being burned at the stake, you've got people fighting rebellions, you've got people going to war against each other over religion. So, but at this point in England, this hasn't really happened. Some people have started sort of being interested in this Protestant stuff and sort of think, oh, it's interesting. Maybe this Luther's got a point, and maybe the Pope is a bit of a cunt, or maybe it is a lot of bollocks, But as far as the state and the church is concerned in England, it's still Catholic. And King Henry VIII thinks that Martin Luther is a cunt, and he thinks all these Protestants are a bunch of fucking wankers. And he actually writes a book where he says that the Pope is brilliant and that Martin Luther is a cunt and that Protestants are a bunch of assholes and they're talking bollocks. And the Pope is really fucking happy with Henry VIII for saying this, and he gives Henry VIII the special title Defender of the Faith, and Henry's well fucking chuffed with that, So Henry's doing all right. He's not rocking the boat with the religion. He's friendly with the Pope. He's married to the aunt of the most powerful man in Europe, maybe the world. He's enjoying his life. He's writing music. He's riding horses. He's fighting and wrestling for fun. He's a good-looking bloke. He's in good shape. He's got a six-pack and a pair of pecs, big old biceps on him, and he's fucking brilliant. And he's having a whale of a time. Also, his predecessors' problems have all finished because the Wars of the Roses have been done, and his mother is Elizabeth of York, or was Elizabeth of York. His father was Henry Tudor of the Lancastrians. So he's doing all right, and everything's pretty fucking good, really. One of his best friends is this dude called the Duke of Norfolk. And the Duke of Norfolk is and his son, that they were very much involved in the Wars of the Roses, and their family was, and they're called the Howards. And the Howard family is quite important because the Dukes of Norfolk are quite powerful people, and they had been on the side of the Yorkists during the Wars of the Roses. So that means that they had supported Henry VIII's grandfather, Edward IV, and one of these Dukes of Norfolk had been killed in the Battle of Bosworth by Henry VIII's father. But obviously, Henry VIII isn't really sort of biased about the Wars of the Roses because his father's side had been fighting against his mother's side, so he's he's from both sides, and you know, so he can respect people who fought for his grandfathers, you know, both of them. So anyway, Henry VIII has this guy, the Duke of Norfolk, who is like a really good friend and a powerful man, and he's very, very important. And his name is John Howard, and then they're the Howard's family, and they are the Dukes of Norfolk. So we're just going to call them Norfolk. There's Thomas Howard as well. I think Thomas Howard is the one that's alive now. Yeah, John Howard was the one who got killed at Bosworth, and Thomas Howard is the now Duke of York, and then his son is also Thomas Howard, and he's the next Duke of York. But anyway, now I've said that Henry doesn't get involved in a lot of wars. Well, he does get involved in a war at one point, and he's fighting against the French to help out Charles. And he goes off and fights on the side of Charles, but not as a main guy, but as sort of just part of Charles's army, just to sort of show his support for Charles in battle against the French. And they win that, but I'm not sure what the battle was or what it was all about. But anyway, Scotland has this deal with the French, which is called the Old Alliance. Now, the Scottish have hated the English, always hated the English, ever since Bannockburn and Edward I and that. Ever since then, the Scottish have been pissed off with the English, and they've had this special deal with the French, because you know the French and the English have always been hating each other and been enemies as well. So the Scottish have this old friendship with the French. It's called the Old Alliance. And during the Wars of the Roses, the Scottish had been fighting on the side of the French against the English, you know, and so the Scottish were always supporting the French and always against the English. Now, even though Henry VIII's sister was married to the King of Scotland, it didn't stop the King of Scotland from being against the English and wanting to fuck them over. So anyway, while Henry VIII was off fighting in this war, supporting Charles V against the French, the Scottish under James IV invaded England, and they said we're going to fuck them up the arse while they're not looking, and they came down into England, and Catherine of Aragon took over the leadership of the English, and she led an army up there to fight them. She was leading it in person, but you know she wasn't making all the decisions in the military, or you know fighting with her own sword or stuff. She was there, but the leadership of the English was really by this Norfolk guy and his son, the Howards, and they won a great victory against the Scots, and the Scottish lost and had to fuck off home. And James IV, the King of Scotland, was killed in this fucking battle. So Henry was well fucking pleased with Catherine and with these Norfolk guys. So that was that. Now Henry Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon, and it all looked really good at the start, but she and he were shagging, but she got pregnant, and she had a daughter who they called Mary, and the king was a bit disappointed because he wanted to have a son, and the reason why he was so interested in having a son was because he was worried a little bit that if the royal family was not secure on the throne with a definite male heir, then there could be questions about who's the rightful king, and that the Wars of the Roses could sort of come back again, and cunts could start popping up and claiming the throne, you know, again like they had before. And he remembered that the Wars of the Roses had been absolutely horrible, and loads of people getting killed, and loads of battles, and people being murdered every 10 seconds, and kings being overthrown, and all this shit. and he didn't want that for his country or for his family. So he was really desperate for a son that would be a man who would have no questions about him taking over, so that so that the line would be secure, and that there would be no chance of another civil war in England over who gets to be king. So Henry was disappointed with having a daughter because, as you know, the English haven't really accepted the idea of a woman ruling a country. It's not something that hasn't really happened before. It kind of happened with Matilda back in the anarchy, but she'd been challenged by the Stephen cunt, and there'd been madness and craziness, and we'd never had like a ruler who was a woman. Now, for the sake of clarity, there is a lot of confusion about kings and queens and what they are. Now, there are two types of queen, basically, that you can have. And one of them basically means woman king, and the other one means wife of king. So, but we use the word queen for both of them. So, now, if you're the king and you get married to a woman, then she's called queen, but she doesn't get loads of power and authority. She's just your wife, right? You're the king, and she's your wife, and because she's your wife, everybody calls her queen, and she has a title of queen. But she's not the ruler. You're the ruler, you know. And if you die, she doesn't take over and become ruler. Your son will, you know. So that kind of queen is a consort. Now, consort is a word that means the wife or husband of the ruler. So that kind of a queen is a queen consort. So when Edward IV was king, Elizabeth Woodville was queen, but she was queen consort. And Henry VIII is king now, and his wife Catherine of Aragon is queen, but she's a queen consort. She's that type of queen, the type of queen which means wife of a king. And it's not like being a woman version of a king, it's being the king's wife. Anyway, and the second type of queen that someone can be is to actually be the ruler of a country, and to be the person on the throne, and to be running stuff. And that's like we have now in England, Queen Elizabeth II. She is queen in the same way that if she was a man, she would be king. You know, so it's a bit confusing because when a man marries her, he doesn't then become king. He gets some other title, you know. But just to say that kings and queens, and marrying someone who is a king or queen doesn't make you a king or queen in the same way that that person is a king or queen. They just have different titles for what they call the husband or the wife of the person who is in charge. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that if Henry VIII died leaving only a daughter, then that daughter would have to try to become queen, as in ruler of the country, and a lot of people would have a problem accepting a woman as ruler of the country because that had never really happened in England before. We've always had a bloke in charge, you know. Anyway, and Henry thought that would be a bit dodgy because it wouldn't be as safe or as secure as if he had a son to become proper king, you know. Some countries in the world actually had a woman and called the woman king. In Lithuania, they had a woman who was king. Now that makes a lot more fucking sense. That's a lot less confusing, you know, than calling them queen. So anyway, so Henry was pissed off because his wife had given him a daughter, Mary. So, you know, a bit harsh, you could say. It's not very nice, is it, to be disappointed? You should love all your children, you know, not. But he said she was useless. He said, "You've given me a fucking useless daughter," you know. And so she said, Catherine said, "Well, I'll try harder next time to give you a son," you know, as if you could control it, you know. Anyway, Next time she gets pregnant, unfortunately the child dies, and it happens a few times actually. And the king is not very supportive. He's like, for fuck's sake, where's my son? Oh, sick of this, And he starts getting sort of pissed off and sick of it with his wife and not having a son. And yeah, he's getting a bit annoyed and bored with her. And also he likes shagging these other women, and he's got all these women that he shags on the side, for fun. And his friend, the Duke of Norfolk, has two nieces, and they're called the Boleyn sisters. And the eldest, well, one of the Boleyn sisters is called Mary Boleyn, and she is shagging the king, and he's enjoying that. But the king fancies Mary Boleyn's sister as well, and her name is Anne Boleyn, and the king wants to shag her, but she doesn't want to shag the king. She says, "Oh, you're shagging my sister. You're not going to shag me as well." And he's like, "I really want to shag Anne." And Anne says, "Well, if you want to shag, then you're going to have to marry me." And he's like, "Well, I can't fucking marry you because I'm already married to Catherine of Aragon, and there's no such thing as divorce in the Catholic Church at this time. And there's no getting out of this marriage." Yeah, to be honest, I'm getting annoyed with Catherine, and she's not the best wife in the world because she's only given me a useless daughter, and so I'm a bit fucking pissed off with her. So anyway, he says, "Fuck," and he's a bit annoyed, and he's got the horn for Anne. Now, Anne and her friends are kind of interested in this Protestant stuff, but not in any serious way. And Norfolk himself is a proper Catholic, and he thinks that these Protestant guys are a bunch of cunts anyway. So there's also this guy that is a bishop who is one of Henry's top dudes in the government, and who wants to help Henry in any way he can, and his name is Cardinal Wolsey. And this Wolsey guy is someone who is not from an aristocratic family, but someone who has sort of done very well in life out of his own hard work and success. And his father had been just a butcher, and he now was one of the most powerful men in England because he'd done so fucking well for himself through hard work and study and everything else, and had become Cardinal Wolsey, one of the top men in the Catholic Church and one of the top men in the government of Henry VIII, and was someone that Henry looked up to and respected and relied on to help him with the government and all the stuff that he was doing. And Henry said to this Wolsey guy, "Look, I'm fucking sick of Catherine, and I want to shag and marry Anne. Can you try to sort of sort it out somehow with the Pope so that I can do that? Because I'm fucking sick of Catherine, And Wolsey said, "I'm going to try my best to help you, because, I'm your man. And I also, involved in the Catholic Church, and, I have a relationship with the Pope and all that." And Wolsey was really trying hard to try to find some way that Henry could get rid of Catherine of Aragon and get with Anne. Now, there are also a couple of other people who were important politicians that were around at this time in England. And basically, something had happened recently, which was that the old aristocracy, and having all these lords doing whatever the fuck they wanted, like they had done in the Wars of the Roses, that had kind of been ended now, and the kings, Henry VII especially, had started sort of making it so that lords didn't have as much power and freedom to do what they wanted, and to make it so that the state had sort of a more power, and that power was more centralized in the state rather than having all these lords doing whatever the fuck they want, you know, and causing trouble. Um, and the state now had like a state army, and you know there was state finances, and the king was the head of the state, and power was becoming more centralized rather than being dispersed among all these powerful families. So that meant that the king was more powerful than he used to be, and he didn't have to rely on these nobles so much, and these nobles actually had to sort of suck up to the king to keep their power and keep their heads and everything else, which was a good thing for the king, not so good a thing for these powerful families. But just to say, these families are not as powerful as they had been during the War of the Roses, and now we're living in a country where there's more of a government and a state with a king that controls everything, and rather than living in a sort of place where there are all these different lords running stuff. Anyway, part of this new system with a government and a state and a centralized power is that the king gets these sort of professional politicians that work for him, and these professional politicians are not people from aristocratic families. You know, they're not lords and dukes. They're just some random cunts from poor families, from nothing, who have worked hard and have become politicians and have become administrators, and have sort of managed to get themselves into positions where they serve the king and help him get shit done in government, and they're like professional politicians. And a lot of the aristocrats, the lords, the nobles, they don't like these guys because they think that they come from shit, and what the fuck are they doing, you know, influencing the king. But anyway, the king likes these guys because they help him to control the country, and that they sort of serve him as his sort of administrators. So I don't know, if you watch Game of Thrones, they're people a little bit like Baelish or Varys and those types of people. But anyway, they support the king. Now Wolsey is one of these guys, and he's become powerful through the church, the politics of the church, but also serving the king and helping the king get what he wants. And he has a guy working for him called Thomas Cromwell, and Thomas Cromwell is someone who's also very ambitious. Now there's also another guy who's called Thomas More, and Thomas More is also famous as a philosopher and a writer, and also he's a big Catholic and he hates the Protestant thing as well. Wolsey is obviously a Catholic. He's a Catholic cardinal. Thomas Cromwell, becomes a Protestant, and the fact that he's a Protestant is important later on. But anyway, there's this a group of people who sort of run things for the king, and they're not the old aristocrats. They are these sort of professional politicians. Although the old aristocrats, some of them are still important. You know, the Duke of Norfolk, for example, is still an important dude. You know, but he's still the king is the boss. You know, the king is the boss, and he doesn't have to suck up to anybody else, and they have to suck up to him. So anyway, so the king wants to divorce or get rid of Catherine and get with Anne, and he wants to use these. He's got these politicians working on the case, you know, trying to get the church to agree to sort that out for him. Now, the argument that he and these people come up with is to say that that when he married Catherine, that shouldn't have happened. That was wrong what they did, and that he says that them not having any sons, and that Catherine having miscarriages and stillborn children is God's punishment for the marriage, and that the marriage is cursed by God. And he says that he thinks that he never should have married his brother's widow, because Catherine was married to Arthur, and you're not supposed to marry your brother's wife. But if you remember, um, Henry VII had said that they didn't shag Arthur and Catherine of Aragon, and because they didn't shag, that meant that it was all right for Catherine to marry Henry. And what Henry VIII now wanted to say is that his brother had shagged her, and that the saying that they hadn't shagged was a lie, and that they shagged, and that because they shagged, that meant that he shouldn't have fucking married her because she was his brother's widow and had shagged his brother, and that therefore the Pope should be able to sort of sort it out so that he could say that the marriage between Henry and Catherine was cancelled or annulled on the grounds that she had shagged his brother and been married to him. You see, so that was the line that Henry was going for and was hoping to convince the Pope to agree with. Now, one of the problems was that Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, was Catherine of Aragon's nephew, and he was extremely powerful. And during his campaign against the French and his attempt to conquer bits of Italy, he had actually attacked Rome and had sort of taken the Pope prisoner. So the Pope was sort of in the power of Charles the Emperor, and of course he supported Catherine of Aragon, and so it was very difficult to get the Pope to sort of do something against her and to insult Charles. So anyway, for various reasons, the Pope just could not be persuaded to go along with it. Another reason was because it made him look like a cunt for having allowed the marriage in the first place, and all this flip-flopping around and changing the mind and everything seemed a bit stupid. And the Pope really he couldn't be budged. He couldn't be persuaded to agree with Henry to stop the marriage. So that means that he was stuck with Catherine, and he couldn't get with Anne. So Henry was really annoyed, and he was like, "For fuck's sake!" And he got really pissed off with Wolsey, because Wolsey was trying his hardest to get Henry's wishes through and to persuade the Pope, and it wasn't his fucking fault, but Henry blamed him and said, "Oh, fuck you, Wolsey, you're a cunt, you've let me down, you haven't done what I wanted, you're a failure, now you're fuck off." And he sort of sacked him and told him to fuck off and gave him the boot and disgraced him and told him he was a cunt and that he wasn't friends with him anymore. And poor old Wolsey, he's done his best, and he really wanted to help Henry, and a lot of these lords and dukes and nobles really didn't like Wolsey because they were stuck up, because he wasn't one of them. He wasn't an aristocrat. He was someone who had made himself successful through hard work, and they didn't respect that. They thought that meant you were shit and that you were a cunt, and it's better to be someone who doesn't do fuck all but who has a good name and who comes from a special family. That's better than being someone who comes from nothing and works hard and is successful. It was like that then. It was the aristocratic mentality and not the hard work mentality. So all these fucking lords and dukes and stuff, they were all sticking a knife in, so to speak, and saying, "Ah, Wolsey's a cunt, yeah, fuck you, Wolsey, ha ha, nah, prick," And poor old Wolsey was like, "Oh, fuck," Anyway, but Wolsey's sort of assistant, Thomas Cromwell, he steps up and he sort of takes over from Wolsey. Now, there's a bit of a sort of a bit of a rivalry between him and this Thomas More guy. And the reason is that Thomas More is a really hardcore Catholic and wants to burn Protestants at the stake and have them all killed and stuff. And he does actually arrange for some Protestants in England to be burned at the stake. And that's what he does. Whereas Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, actually is a Protestant. But he's a very clever guy, and he manages to sort of take over from Wolsey as the man who tries to advise the king and help the king get what he wants. So anyway, what happens is Cromwell sort of says to, oh, by the way, Cromwell also gets involved with this other guy called Thomas Cranmer. Everyone's called Thomas. Well, this Cranmer is sort of a priest, and he's a Protestant priest, and he wants England to become Protestant. This Cranmer guy, and Cranmer is with Cromwell, and they hang out together in their sort of Protestant parties and their Protestant groups, where they all talk about how they want to change England and make it Protestant, and how much they like, you know, Martin Luther and everything else. And anyway, they get together and they persuade the king that that it would be all right if, and he could marry and do what he wants if England just left the Catholic Church, you know, like Brexit, but for the church, if they did like a Brexit thing and they said we're going to leave the Catholic Church and we're going to have our own church instead, then the Pope, then the king could do whatever he wanted, and he could divorce and marry, you know. And they also said, look, if you get rid of Catholicism and you say that England is now Protestant, and you don't have to do what the Pope says, or you know, listen to what the Pope tells you, or worry about what Catholics are going to say, then you can do what you want, and you can get rid of Catherine, and you can marry Anne or whoever you want, you know, and do what you like. And also, you know, instead of the Pope being the head of the church, then you can be the head of the church in England, right? And you can be the boss of it. And we don't have to make it that radically different. You know, people don't have to change all their beliefs about God and Jesus and everything. It's mostly going to be just sort of a change of management. And you can keep all the nice things about the religion that you like, but it will be your religion, you know, your church, and not the Pope's. And it's really good for you, because you can then do whatever the fuck you want, you know. Also, you can go around and take all the money off of all the churches and all the priests and the bishops in England and take it for yourself, because you're now the boss of religion in England, you know. So this is really clever, you know. And Henry, even though he had been a massive Catholic, he really wanted Anne so much, and he liked this idea of what Cromwell and Cranmer were saying. So that's what they did. He said, fuck the Pope, and he created the Church of England with himself as the head of the church. And the Church of England still exists today, and the King or Queen of England is always the head of that church. And this is extremely important for the whole history of England. And it's one of the most important things about King Henry VIII, of what he did. Now, as for the religion itself, the Church of England at the beginning isn't that much different from the Catholic Church. It's mostly just the question of the Pope and the priests and the bishops and that. And then they still believe in the Bible and most of the stuff that the others believe in. They're not as radical as like the Hussites or Martin Luther or any of those, you know, because Henry VIII doesn't really have any sort of big beef with the church, and his reason for changing the religion is practical. It's because he wants to marry and get his end away, you know. It's not anything to do with having any sort of strong feelings about the church or the religion. So the Church of England at the beginning isn't that different from the Catholic Church. And now there are people in England, the Catholics, they want the Church of England to be Catholic again, or to be as close to Catholic as possible, and they want to continue killing Protestants and burning people for saying stuff that goes against the Catholic Church. And sometimes the king agrees to that and says, yeah, you can burn those people for saying those things, you know, even though I'm not the Catholic anymore, we still believe in the same shit as the Catholics, you know. But then there are Protestants who, like Cranmer and others, who say, well, look, let's change things a bit, and let's follow the other Protestants in Europe and change things about the religion. And sometimes the king agrees with them and says, okay, we'll change this thing. But during the reign of King Henry VIII, he doesn't change the religion that much in terms of the belief system and what people are supposed to do or supposed to say, and he kind of he doesn't want to make it that radically different, and it doesn't become that radically different. The Church of England, it's kind of like an English version of the Catholic Church, and it's not like, you know, the Quakers or any of those guys that you see in other countries. So anyway, even though there are groups in England of people who have different and stronger, more radical Protestant ideas, you know, than those of Henry and those of his bishops and priests in the Church of England. So anyway, he's changed the religion and all that, and he gets rid of Catherine. He says, I finish with you, you know, we never should have been married in the first place, and you've given me shit, you know, daughter and that, and you know, she can fuck off as well. She's not my proper daughter, she's a bastard, she's illegitimate because our marriage was bollocks. And he marries Anne Boleyn, and he shags Anne Boleyn as his wife, and Anne Boleyn's now the queen. She doesn't like Cromwell very much and those dudes, even though they sort of helped her to become queen, because she thinks that they are sort of manipulative and untrustworthy. Now the king has to try to get everyone to agree with what he's done, with making himself the head of the Church of England, and he says, like, every cunt's got to sign this proper promise, and they've got to swear an oath, like a promise, that they agree that I'm the head of the Church of England, and because he wants everyone to sort of prove that they support him and are loyal and agree with what he's done. But there are some people who don't agree with it. A lot of these people who are really strong Catholics, they say, no, the Pope is still the man, and I don't care what the king's done, he's not the head of the church. The Pope is the head of the church, not the king. And this is called the Act of Supremacy. And the king says, well, if you don't fucking agree with me being head of the Church of England, then we're gonna fucking kill you. And a lot of these people get executed for not agreeing with the king taking over as leader of the Church of England, and telling the Pope to fuck off, you know. And this Thomas More fellow, who was the Catholic guy that was burning Protestants and who was one of the king's sort of counselors, he's a very famous person, and he says, I'm not going to fucking agree with the king. And they say, we're going to cut your head off, and he says, well, you're going to have to cut my head off then, because I'm not going to betray my religious beliefs. You know, I'm not going to sell myself, and I'm going to die for what I believe to be true. And so they cut his head off, and he's dead. Poor old Thomas More. And then, like, the Thomas Cromwell, he's a new kind of like king's top politician. He's the guy that helped him get rid of Catherine of Aragon, and helped him to get married to Anne Boleyn, and helped him to sort of set up the Church of England. And now this Cranmer fellow is now sort of in charge of the church, and so the church is sort of changing and becoming a little bit more Protestant. and well, when I say he's in charge of it, he's the Archbishop of Canterbury, which means he actually runs it and organises it, whereas the king is like the head of it, but he doesn't have to do much. He's like, you know, the boss, but he just takes it easy. And the Archbishop of Canterbury is the one that actually organises and runs it, you know, does the business of the church in England. But sometimes the king does get involved and start, you know, pushing things through that he wants. But anyway, so the church has changed now from Catholic to Church of England, with Henry VIII as the head, and with Cranmer as Archbishop, and Thomas Cromwell is one of the king's top dudes in the government. Anne Boleyn is the Queen of England. Her uncle Thomas, the Norfolk fellow, he's quite pleased that his niece is the Queen, because that makes him look good. Now, he's not so happy about all these Protestants and stuff, because he's a Catholic, but he's very happy about the fact that his niece is Queen, and it means that his relationship with the king is good. Anyway, one of the things, remember, the king wants the most is a son, and he gets Anne Boleyn pregnant, and she has a daughter, and the king's really pissed off because he wanted a son, and now he's got another daughter, and he's especially annoyed after all the trouble he went to get with Anne, and now he's got another daughter. Anyway, she's called Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And remember that the king also has another daughter called Mary, who was his daughter with Catherine of Aragon. So we've now got the king on his second wife, and with two daughters of different mothers, so they're half sisters, you know, Mary and Elizabeth. And Mary is sort of pissed off about what happened with her mother and everything, and Mary doesn't like Anne Boleyn, and doesn't really care too much for her new baby sister Elizabeth, because Mary feels that everything they had has been stolen from them, and they've been treated very unfairly. So now Henry's pissed off because of having a daughter, and then the same thing happens to Elizabeth that happened to Catherine, which is that she lost a child. She had a pregnancy, and the child was born dead. You know, it would have been a boy, but it didn't live, and Henry blamed her for it, and it's a bit unfair. And he was a bit of a massive cunt, really, if you ask me, because he said, "Oh, for fuck's sake, you've fucking given me a useless daughter and a fucking dead baby, you stupid bitch," and fuck's sake, you know, and he's already pissed off, which is a bit harsh. And poor Anne, you know, she's having a really tough time being married to this prick. And now she has a brother whose name is George Boleyn, and you know, they're quite close, they're quite good friends, her and her brother, you know, as brothers and sisters are usually. And you know, she has sort of people that work for her, you know, servants and stuff, and some friends, you know, she has a life, you know, and the king is so pissed off that he goes to Cromwell, and he says, "I'm sick of Anne. I want to get rid of Anne. I want it done with her. I want to finish with her." And Cromwell says, "Well, why? You know, I thought you were happy. I thought that's what you wanted was Anne. You know, what the fuck's happened? You know?" And basically, the king has met this other girl who he fancies, because basically once he shags a girl, he gets bored. That's his problem. He says it's all about fucking sons and daughters. It isn't. But basically, he's just never fucking happy, and he's always wanting some other woman. He's a bit of a cunt, you know. Anyway, so he he fancies this woman called Jane Seymour, and he says, "I'd like to see more of Seymour. I'd like to see her tits and that." Anyway, so he wants to get with Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour is the daughter of this quite powerful, quite wealthy dude, um, who's sort of friendly with Henry, and Henry quite often goes to his house and they kind of suck up to him and they have parties with him and stuff. Anyway, he fancies Jane Seymour, and he's sick of Anne, and he thinks if he gets with Jane Seymour, then he might have a son with her, you know. So anyway, his problem is he's got Anne now, and they've gone through a lot of trouble to organise Anne, you know, and they can't really do the same trick again that they did the first time with Catherine, you know, because so he's like, fuck, you know, what am I going to do? So what they do basically is these politicians go around and they start accusing Anne of cheating on Henry and shagging all these different guys. And they go around and they gather up all these random blokes that know Anne, you know, that are friends with her or work for her or whatever. And they say, are you shagging the Queen? And they say no. And they get like hit them on the head. They say, are you shagging the Queen? They say no. Then they like tie them up to a torture device and torture them. And they say, are you shagging the Queen? He goes, no. And basically they torture these poor cunts into saying that they shagged the Queen. You know, it's completely unfair. You know, it's really wrong. And they even include Anne's brother, George, and they say that she's shagging him as well, you know, which is incest. And she isn't doing that, and she's not doing any of this. And it's all bollocks, you know, they're just making shit up against Anne and to destroy her. And the king kind of goes along with it because he wants to get with Jane Seymour. And it's really unfair. And poor Anne is being treated like shit and is being accused of a crime that she didn't commit. And all these people, these poor bastards, you know, that are being accused with her. And there's no fair trial, you know, it's just a bunch of cunts who are just saying that she's done all this stuff wrong. And they're forcing people to sign things that they didn't do by force and torture and stuff. And it's a complete bunch of bollocks, you know. And anyway, they say that she's been guilty of treason because shagging other people is treason. And her and all these other poor bastards, including her brother, are fucking executed. And she has her head cut off. And the only thing that the king does to try to be kind is say, well, don't use an axe, get some cunt with a sword to do it, you know, because then it'd be better. So he gets this bloke from France to come over who's like an expert at cutting people's heads off with swords. And that means that it's quick, you know. But anyway, so poor Anne is dead, you know, and now the king is single again. He's got two daughters, Elizabeth and Mary, both by different women who he's finished with. Catherine of Aragon, I think, is dead by this point anyway, you know. And Henry says, you know, Elizabeth, you know, she can go fuck herself as well, you know, because her mother was a bitch, you know. And he's not much of a father. He's a cunt, you know, basically. You know, I liked him at the beginning, but now he's a cunt. Anyway, so Henry marries this Jane Seymour woman, and he really fancies her, and he likes her even more than he liked Anne Boleyn, and she gets pregnant, and now Henry also sort of invites her family and her relatives to sort of get close to the king and gives them lots of power and tells them that they're good guys. And Jane has these two brothers, and they're both really ambitious, and they use their sister as a way to get close to the king. And the Seymours are also Protestants, which is important. And anyway, they're interested in power and stuff. Anyway, but Jane Seymour gets pregnant, and she has a son. So the king is really fucking happy with that, because he always wanted a son. and they call the boy Edward. But Jane dies in childbirth, so they've got this son, but the mother is dead. Henry's wife, Jane's dead, and of course Henry's a bit pissed off because he liked her, you know. So poor Jane Seymour is dead. So he's had 3 wives now, and they're all fucking dead. And he's got 3 kids, all by 3 different women. And Edward is the youngest, and he's a boy, so he's the heir to the throne now. So when Henry dies, it will be Edward that takes over. And Edward's 2 uncles, these Seymour uncles, they have a big influence on him, and they sort of get involved with him and sort of teach him and stuff, and very much influence the boy and in his upbringing, and they make sure that he is a Protestant, and they make sure that he loves all the Protestant stuff, and he's not a Catholic. Elizabeth also is a Protestant as well. So 2 of Henry's children are Protestants. Mary is still a Catholic, and Henry is a Protestant, but not that big a Protestant. You know, he's head of the Protestant Church, but he's not as extreme or radical a Protestant as other people. The Seymours are, in Cranmer, Cromwell, and so on. Anyway, something else happens, and I'm not quite sure I've got the dates and times right, but it doesn't matter that much. But anyway, the king decides that he wants to get some more money, so he sends people round to all the churches and monasteries, it's a religious buildings in the country, and just sort of steals all their shit, you know, all their gold and everything else, and a lot of people in England are still Catholic, and they think this is really out of order and not fair, you know, having their fucking monasteries and their churches all fucking ransacked and burgled, you know, by the king. And a group of people, especially in the north of England, get together, Catholic people, and they say, we're sick of the king shitting on the Catholics and doing all this fucking stuff. So they rebelled against the king, and it's called the Pilgrimage of Grace. And one of the people involved in this Pilgrimage of Grace is someone from this Percy family, you know, that were involved in the Wars of the Roses and all that. And anyway, they start sort of they start fighting against the king and stuff, and the king ends up defeating them in the end. And the Duke of Norfolk is involved in this and helps the king, even though he's a Catholic and he kind of sympathises with the rebels. He's still more interested in, you know, pleasing the king. Anyway, so these Catholic rebels have to fuck off, and the king sort of thinks maybe he shouldn't be so Protestant, and it might not be so good to go too far down the Protestant road and whatnot. So Cranmer and Cromwell and them are in a precarious situation, because if the hardcore Catholics get back into power, then they might get, you know, burned at the stake. So their lives are in jeopardy, and they have to keep power and keep control and keep their influence on the king to defend themselves against their Catholic enemies. The king sort of does whatever he thinks is in his best interest, and he doesn't give a fuck about any of them, really, you know. Anyway, so the king is single now, and he's after a wife, it'll be wife number 4, and so Thomas Cromwell and Cranmer and those guys, the Protestant guys, and the guys who are the politicians that support Henry at the moment and are in, you know, in favour. They think that it will help them out if they get the king to marry a Protestant princess from a European country. So they look around and they try to find a girl for the king, and they find this German princess whose name is Anne of Cleves, and she is a daughter of some obscure German duke or lord or whatever. Anyway, the king Henry sort of says, "All right, if you think so, you know," and there's some diplomatic advantage to it that where it sort of causes the fucking anyway. He fucking says that he'll marry this woman, and anyway, there's this famous portrait painter called Hans Holbein, and Hans Holbein painted a lot of the paintings of Henry himself and his family, and a lot of the really nice paintings that you see. In fact, I think the one I'm using here on the of Henry is by Holbein, and so anyway, Henry sends Holbein to go and see this Anne of Cleves girl, and he says, "I want you to paint a portrait of her," because he didn't have any fucking cameras, you know, or anything back then. So he sends him to go and paint her portrait. So he wants to know what she looks like, because he doesn't want to marry some ugly girl, you know. So Holbein goes over there to see her, and he paints her portrait, and he brings it back to Henry, and he says, "There you go, that's what she looks like." And Henry says, "Oh yeah, she looks all right," you know. So anyway, the whole thing is arranged, and Anne of Cleves comes to England, and she meets Henry, and basically he thinks that she's ugly, and he says that she doesn't look like the portrait, and you know, Hans Holbein sort of made her look better than she really does in real life, and he wasn't very happy with her, and he wasn't very impressed by her, and he thought she was an ugly bitch, and so he said, "Fuck this, I'm gonna cancel this marriage, it's bullshit," and he sort of immediately cancelled the marriage and told her to fuck off, and he gave her some money and some stuff and said, "Well, sorry about the, you know, sorry for fucking you about, and you know, but I didn't know you were an ugly bitch, it's not my fault, you know, it's these cunts' fault," and he blamed Cromwell for it, and he said, "Right, Cromwell, you're a cunt, you've really pissed me off marrying me to this ugly bitch, and I'm gonna have you executed now." And poor old Cromwell was taken out and executed, had his head cut off. Now, Thomas Cromwell had really worked hard, you know, trying to help Henry to get what he wanted, and now he was getting executed just because this girl wasn't very good looking. So it's a bit unfair for him. Now, that was also a bit of a blow to the sort of Protestant gang, and Cranmer and others, who were a bit upset, and also it was good for these Catholic dudes who were looking to sort of bring back Catholicism and get rid of the Protestants. And one of the Catholic dudes was this guy called Stephen Gardiner, and Stephen Gardiner was a Catholic who wanted to do away with the Protestant stuff and kill all the Protestants, and kill Cranmer and all the rest of them. So he was really happy that Cromwell was dead, you know. Another Catholic was this Norfolk, Duke of Norfolk, and he was happy that Cromwell was dead because he didn't like Cromwell. Anyway, now now Duke of Norfolk gets involved with the king, and he's glad that Cromwell is dead, and he says, "Right, I'm gonna fucking sort out another queen for the king." Now the king was a little bit pissed off with Norfolk because things hadn't worked out with Anne Boleyn, and you remember that Anne Boleyn was Norfolk's niece, and Norfolk had sort of set the king up with Mary and Anne Boleyn in the first place. But anyway, Norfolk had another niece, and her name was Catherine Howard, and she was very young. She was only 17 years old, and the king was an old fucker at this time. this point, and the king um, he said yeah, and he fancied her because she was young and attractive, and they got married, and her name was, as I said, Catherine Howard. Um, so the next thing that happens is that Catherine Howard actually tries to sleep with the king, and he's not very good. He can't get it up. He has erectile dysfunction. He can't keep his knob up in the air, and so he can't shag her properly. And so, she's an attractive young woman, and she starts going around and sort of trying to get boyfriends and stuff, And the king is pissed off about the sex not working, and he starts getting pissed off with her, and also some people start getting suspicious, and people who don't like her sort of start to sort of find out what she's up to, which is that she's cheating on the king. So she's cheating on the king, and she knows that Anne Boleyn was beheaded for cheating on the king, and she can remember what happened to her, and but she's still doing it. So she's in a very dangerous position. Now she goes to her uncle Norfolk, and she says, "Fucking hell, Norfolk, I'm in the shit, uncle. What am I going to do? I don't want to end up like Anne." And Norfolk says, "Well, the best thing that you can do, niece, is to get pregnant. And it doesn't matter if it's the king's child or some other cunt's child. We'll still say it's the king's child, and the king will believe that you're carrying his child, and that will save your life, So get pregnant, and then you're safe." So she does more cheating, and because the king isn't much good at the shagging, so she's shagging all these other guys, these young men, so that she can get pregnant. So then she can say that she's carrying the king's child, and then the king won't want to cut her head off, and won't believe people when they say that she's cheating on him, So unfortunately, she doesn't get pregnant, and she does get caught with the cheating, and the people who don't like her, and the people, these guys, they sort of spill the beans, and they tell the king what she's been up to, and unfortunately her and her sort of boyfriend guys and anyone that was involved in helping her, that they all get fucking killed, executed, heads cut off, and she has her head cut off, and the king is pissed off with Norfolk now, calls him a cunt, and Norfolk has to fuck off and sort of keep his head down. Yeah, so the king is sort of a very dangerous person to try to help, because everyone that's tried to help him has ended up dead or in the shit, So anyway, now these Catholic people have sort of convinced the king now that Protestants are a bit of a bunch of cunts, and they've killed a few Protestants for being too Protestant, and the king has sort of agreed that he maybe been a bit too hasty in getting rid of the Pope, and maybe he can become friends with the Pope again somehow, and that kind of thing. And at this time, there are people who are Protestant, and there are people who are Catholic in England, and it's sort of a mix of different people. So there's a lot of sort of potential religious violence that can happen, and people killing each other because of religion, and now the king wants to get married again. So he's had 5 wives, and they're all dead, and now he's looking for wife number 6. And he finds this woman called Catherine Parr, and she's a widow of some cunt who's died, and she's a Protestant as well, but she has to be very careful because these cunts who don't like her, they're trying to get the king to agree to have her killed. Anyway, she's married to the king, and the king is married to Catherine Parr, and these people are trying to get the king to have her killed for being Protestant, or for being too Protestant, you know, and they almost succeed, but then they fail. And anyway, this Catherine Parr, she is very good friends with these Seymour people. These are the relatives of Jane Seymour, who had been Henry VIII's wife that gave him the son, and who he liked. So these Seymour people and Catherine Parr are kind of a team now, and Henry VIII dies, and Catherine Parr is all right. She lived through it, and then she marries one of these Seymour dudes, and then her and the Seymour dude are responsible for Elizabeth, and they're looking after Elizabeth, you know, his the daughter of the king with Anne Boleyn. So she's being looked after by Catherine Parr, that's the king's last wife, and the Seymours, who are the brothers of his third wife. So it's this weird sort of group of people who aren't necessarily direct family, but they're all related to the king in different ways, and because they're all Protestant, they've all sort of got together to form this like family, you know, with Edward's in there as well. So they've got the boy Edward, the girl Elizabeth, with the Seymours, and with the Queen, the last wife of the king, and they've all got together. And of course, Edward, the boy, is now the king, and he's a child still. He's still a child, King Edward, and he is being controlled by this group of people, the Seymours mainly, and Catherine Parr. They're the people that control the king, and they're all extreme Protestant, and they put all these Catholic troublemakers in prison, in Gardiner and all those cunts. They put those in prison, and they push forward more changes in the religion to make it more Protestant. And Cranmer does very well, and he's very happy. And if you're Protestant in this time, then you're having a good time. If you're Catholic, then you're going to be a bit pissed off. So yeah, Edward the Sixth is the boy king, and his government is sort of dominated by his uncles, the Seymours. Now, one of the Seymours is married to Catherine Parr, and this Seymour and Catherine Parr are sort of looking after Elizabeth, in Princess Elizabeth, as sort of like foster parents, and she's a teenager now, like 13, 14 years old, and this Seymour guy is basically a bit of a pedo, and he's sort of molesting and touching her up, and maybe raping her or shagging her on a regular basis, and you know, she's just a teenage girl, and he's abusing her, and Catherine Parr either doesn't know about it or is sort of letting it happen. She does try to stop it though at some point, and she says, "You fucking take your hands off her, you fucking pervert cunt," you know. Anyway, but Seymour cunt is fucking about with Elizabeth, and his brother is also very powerful. His brother is actually more powerful than him, the other Seymour. But this Seymour is fiddling with Princess Elizabeth. You know, this Princess Elizabeth is the one that was Anne Boleyn's daughter with King Henry. Anyway, she's been messed about with by the Seymour, and this Seymour guy wants to sort of take over control of the king and of the government, because his brother is actually the man who's sort of higher up in control than he is. Anyway, so firstly he wants to marry Elizabeth, and he makes a sort of a plan to try to marry Elizabeth. And he says when Catherine Parr dies, and I can get with Elizabeth and marry her, even though she's only a teenager, and then I can somehow use that to keep more power. And then if anything happens to Edward, then I can make myself sort of king by somehow by marrying Elizabeth or something like that. Anyway, he sees an opportunity to enrich and empower himself through control of Elizabeth. And so I don't know if he gets drunk or something, but he makes a really bad decision. He tries to go to the king, the boy king, and to sort of kidnap him or sort of grab him and take him somehow, and somehow I don't know somehow I don't know what he wants to fucking do with him, but he goes into the boy's bedroom, and he's like gonna grab him out of his bed or something. I don't know what the fuck he thinks he's doing anyway. But he's gone into the king's bedroom, and the king's asleep, and he goes in there, and the boy Edward has got a dog, and the dog is defending the king, and the dog goes fuck off, and starts barking and sort of jumping up and barking and growling and going to bite Seymour. And Seymour just takes his sword out and fucking kills the poor dog. This is the king's dog. And this cunt has just gone into his bedroom and killed his dog. It's bad enough that he's fucking pedophiling his sister, and now he's killed his dog. And the king is like, oh, for fuck's sake, what did you do that for, Uncle Cunt? And all the other guards come running in, and they grab him and they say, what the fuck are you doing in the king's bedroom with his sword out? What the fuck is this? You're trying to kill the king? Is this treason? And it looks really bad. And Seymour tries to get out of it. He says, sorry, I was just coming to see my nephew, and I didn't want to do any harm, and the dog just attacked me. But they were all like, oh, fuck off, And they're also pissed off because they knew about his plan to try to marry Elizabeth. So they said, right, you're a cunt and a traitor, and they took him and they cut his head off. And to be honest, he was a bit of a cunt, and he probably deserved it. Anyway, Elizabeth is a teenage girl, but she's older than the king. And the king and her, they kind of like each other, and they're kind of friendly towards each other because, of course, they are brother and sister, even though they come from different mothers. And Elizabeth is closer to Edward than Mary, because Mary is from the first marriage, and she's Catholic, and she was a daughter of Catherine of Aragon, whereas Edward's family are Protestants and whatnot. Anyway, so Elizabeth comes under suspicion now, and some of these cunts who didn't like Seymour, that they are suspicious of her, and they say, well, was she involved in Seymour's treason, and was she trying to help Seymour to get rid of her brother, and she has to defend herself from these accusations, but she's very clever actually, and she's very good at defending herself, and she says, look, he was a cunt and I didn't like him, and he was trying to touch me up. He was a dirty, filthy old fuck, and I didn't want anything to do with him, and it wasn't my fault. I'm just a little girl, and I love my brother, and I'm glad the cunt's dead, this Seymour. And that her arguments win, and her brother says, yeah, I believe my sister, and I trust her, and I don't think she was involved in this treason. And and that's that. Now there's also another guy who's involved in the politics, and he is he is he's some cunt who who wants to get power as well, and he's enemies with the Seymours, but he's also a Protestant, and I can't remember what the fuck his name is now. Fuck, I have to put it on the screen. Anyway, this other bloke, he wants the Edward to marry his someone from his family, and he's also married his son to I think his name is Sudley. Yeah, Sudley. I'm going to call him Sudley. So Sudley is also on this council of the king, because obviously the king's still a boy and he's got this council, and their people in the council are sort of fighting among themselves a little bit for power, and Sudley has sort of done quite well because he's been given a position now that Uncle Seymour is out. The other Seymour brother is still there, but they managed to sort of get him out of the picture as well by sort of saying that he was somehow involved with his brother's treason. So this Sudley fellow becomes quite important. And now there's another sort of relative of the royal family who's in the background. Now, these guys are Protestants, these people in the council, and they're a bit worried about what would happen if the boy died, because Edward VI is not very healthy. He has a lot of health problems, and he's been sick quite often, and they've been a bit worried that he might die, and if he dies, then who's going to take over, and it's possible that the Catholics might take over, because Mary, his oldest sister, is kind of the heir to the throne, even though Henry said she wasn't. But if anything happens to Edward, then there's going to be a big argument about who gets to take over, because it's either going to be Mary or Elizabeth. They're both girls, and one of them's a Catholic and the other one's a Protestant, and so the stakes are really high, and people can end up getting burned at the stake if the wrong person gets in, so it's a big fucking problem for everybody. And there's this fucking hell. So I have to rewind a little bit. Now, Henry VII had a daughter called Mary, who was Henry VIII's sister. And this Mary had married the King of France, but then then she'd also married this guy called Brandon, and Brandon and her had children, and from their family was this woman called Jane. Called fucking Jane something. And so she was related. She was like a cousin of the Tudors, and she was a solid Protestant. And she married the son of this Sudley guy. And anyway, this Sudley guy became very influential with the boy king, and the boy king got sick, and the Sudley guy said, look, we don't want Mary taking over, do we? Because she'll kill all of our friends, because she's a Catholic. So we don't want her. We want to make sure there's a Protestant on the throne. We we don't really want Elizabeth, because she might be a bit shit. And so how about you name this Jane girl to be the heir to you, your heir to the throne. So if you die, then Jane will take over, and she's married to my son. So the throne will be secure, and all our friends will be safe. So Edward agrees. He's basically been manipulated by this cunt, and he names this Jane girl to be the heir to the throne. So really, the fucking succession is all messed up. You know, it's all open to interpretation. You know, is it going to be Mary? Is it going to be Elizabeth? Is it going to be this Jane? Because right now, the poor boy, he's dying. He's on his deathbed and he's fucked. So anyway, poor Edward dies. He's only a kid still, and he's dead. And you know, the Sudley guy wastes no time, and he puts this Jane on the throne, and says she's the fucking queen now, and let's carry on. But Mary, you know, Catholic Mary, the you know, Henry VIII's oldest daughter and the dead king's older sister, she's got a lot of friends, and they say, fucking hell, this isn't fair. Mary's the rightful ruler now, and we want Mary to be queen. Now, some of the Catholics, of course, want this, but it's not just the Catholics. It's a lot of people say, well, that's the right thing. You know, that's the right thing to happen. It's for Mary because she's the eldest, so she should be on the throne. And they basically they come in and they put Mary on the throne, and they get rid of this Sudley and this Jane girl and her husband, and they tell them not to fuck off, and so then they put them in prison and stuff, and then they're fucked. And anyway, so Mary is the queen, and Mary's a Catholic, and she wants to turn England back into a Catholic country. So she says, the Church of England is finished. We're going back to Roman Catholicism, and the Pope is now the man, and we're going to go back to doing what he says. And Cranmer and all those Protestant cunts, well, they're all going to be burnt at the stake. So she has all these guys burned at the stake and killed, and there's loads of them. And she's called Bloody Mary because she killed loads of people, and Bloody Mary is the nickname that the Protestants gave her. And the Protestants end up winning, you know, gradually this whole religious conflict. England ends up being Protestant properly in the end. But during this period, the Catholics are on top, and they're taking revenge on the Protestants by burning them. And poor old Cranmer is one of them that gets burned. And Elizabeth and Mary is fucking them over. Now there's a rebellion against Mary by some cunt who tries to overthrow her because he wants to put Elizabeth on the throne so that we can be Protestant again. But they fail, and he gets killed. And then Mary kind of is suspicious of Elizabeth and says, oh, fucking Elizabeth's a traitor. I'm going to put her in the Tower of London and then kill her. And Elizabeth is put in the Tower of London, and they say, we're going to fucking kill you, Elizabeth. And she says, oh, I didn't do anything wrong, you know. Oh. And they say, oh, we've heard it all before. We don't believe you. You know, you're fucked. So the poor girl is in prison and expecting to be executed. Now, Mary is the queen now, and she's married to Philip II of Spain. And he is the son of old Emperor Charles V. And this Philip II is also extremely powerful, because Spain at this time is like the world superpower, because they've got this big empire in the Americas, and they're super powerful and strong, and they've got all this land and territory in Europe as well, and they're super Catholic, of course. And Philip sort of spends some of his time in England being a consort of England, king consort, which means the king is just a title that he has, you know, and he's the husband of the ruler, and he's, you know, he has to go and rule Spain as well. And Mary isn't that fucking good looking, and she's a bit ill, and she has all these health problems and stuff, and she's going to die, and everyone knows that she's going to die soon, you know, because she's very unhealthy, and she has cancer, or, you know, some unfortunate illness that that in those times they're not able to treat or cure. So she is going to die, and her husband Philip knows that she's going to die, and he would like to shut up. He would like to marry Elizabeth when Mary dies, so that he can keep his relationship with England, and so that he can maybe have children with her or whatever. And he's quite keen on the idea of marrying Elizabeth. So he kind of talks to his wife, the Queen, Mary, and defends Elizabeth and says, oh, all these cunts are saying shit about Elizabeth. They're all liars, you know. She's all right, you know. She's a good girl and stuff. And he influences the Queen to not kill Elizabeth. And anyway, Mary dies, and Elizabeth is made Queen, Elizabeth I. And by the way, all those people that had been involved in the Jane thing, they've all been killed. Mary killed all them because she was pissed off about the rebellion. So there's Jane and there's Sudley and all them lot are all dead anyway. So Elizabeth is the Queen now, and she's a Protestant, and she's a very, very clever girl. And she says, I'm not going to fucking try to tell people what to think and what to believe. I'm going to be a bit more chilled out when it comes to religious belief and stuff. The Catholics are pissed off, you know, because they were hoping to destroy the Protestant Reformation altogether and keep England as a Catholic country. And Elizabeth was on their hit list of people to kill. But she doesn't go out sort of getting revenge on everyone, because she sort of thinks, well, let's get on with the business of government and stuff. There are all these different cunts that want to marry her for different reasons, and she tells them all to fuck off, including Philip of Spain. And she gets the nickname the Virgin Queen because I don't know if she's a virgin, but she's not marrying anyone, so officially that looks like she's not shagging, but she might be shagging, but she's certainly not getting married. Anyway, and Elizabeth is the fucking Queen, and anyway, she's got this bloke that she really likes called Lord Dudley, I think. Anyway, no, she's got fucking hell. She has these blokes that she likes that she's friends with and stuff, but she doesn't want to marry any of them, and she kind of tries to set herself up as sort of like the figurehead of the nation and the leader of the people, and makes a big thing out of the fact that she's the boss. And she says that she's married to England and the English people are her husband, not some bloke. And I'm going to have to stop here, and then we'll do another video about Elizabeth because she's quite important, and I can't remember all the stuff and all the names and things, and I need to do a bit of research. But yeah, she becomes very important, and we'll do her next time. So I'll stop there. And there you go. That's Henry VIII and Queen Mary and King Edward. You know, the Tudors. But the second part of the Tudors will be Elizabeth, and that's the next one.